That was a time when children's entertainment had one simple rule: if it had a cute animal in it, it was probably safe. Probably. Unless that animal was being hunted, crushed, abandoned, drained of its life essence, or sinking into a swamp. Welcome to the 80s. This was the era when fantasy films looked magical, animated movies talked about death and damnation, and children's TV shows casually introduced us to giant slug aliens, nightmare clowns, and forest animals dying every other episode. Were these stories trying to teach us something? Probably. Did they succeed? Maybe. But did they also give us emotional damage? Absolutely. So today we are revisiting the animations, TV shows and films that made our childhoods just a little bit darker. These are the childhood trauma films and TV nightmares we never quite forgot. And let's start with the animated films, because they have the strongest contrast. Colorful characters, cute animals talking, what could possibly go wrong? A lot, actually. One of the pioneering torturers of children's souls was definitely Don Bluth. He made at least 3 of the most gut-wrenching and eye-opening animated feature films of the 80s. Secret of NIMH was his feature debut, and he didn't start soft. The fantasy surface hides a very grounded base story about NIMH, the National Institute of Mental Health, where lab mice develop heightened intelligence. The story follows Mrs. Brisby, a widowed field mouse who seeks help from a group of escaped laboratory rats to save her home and family. The film talks about courage, ethical science, and the use of knowledge for moral ends, and there's plenty of violence here too. The most memorable scene might be Mrs. Brisby meeting the great owl. Those glowing eyes, the spider webs, the bones everywhere, darkness, and just the owl's radiating presence make it feel like we suddenly stepped into a horror film.
Why have you come?
Another Don Bluth film, The Land Before Time, is basically a grief story disguised as a fun dinosaur adventure. Sure, Disney loves the dying parent theme as well, but here there is no filter. We feel the loneliness, fear and separation through the eyes of a cute baby dino. The scene with Littlefoot's mother dying after protecting him from Sharptooth hits hard every single time. It is slow, quiet and emotionally brutal. It doesn't cut away from Littlefoot's confusion and grief.
Dear sweet Littlefoot, do you remember the way to the Great Valley?
I guess so. But why do I have to know you're gonna be with me?
And the film we got is actually heavily toned down. Around 10 minutes of footage were cut because the film's producers, Spielberg and Lucas, felt some scenes were just too dark and intense for young children. These deleted scenes are considered lost, and there is no extended cut publicly available anywhere, so we may never know what other atrocities were supposed to happen in this one, and probably that's for the better. His third film on this list is All Dogs Go to Heaven, where we are thrown into an animated musical about death, murder, gambling, drinking, and we also get to learn about damnation and redemption. Lovely.
Where am I?
This is the Great Hall of Judgment.
Judgment?
Oh, not to worry, Charlie. You'll go to heaven. All dogs go to heaven because, unlike people, dogs are naturally good.
And the scene where Charlie has a nightmare, even though you sort of understood it as a kid that it was only a dream, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. The visuals, the sound effects, the screaming and howling all create this very intense hell experience. Looking like at a Bosch painting or reading Dante's Inferno. And when Charlie finally gets to go to heaven, it is heartbreaking and satisfying at the same time, because we are losing a friend, but that friend also gets his wish. As a kid, it was quite confusing to figure out what emotion I was supposed to feel here exactly. Cute rabbits? Check. Beautiful scenery? Check. Lifelong trauma? Also check. With Watership Down, I really don't understand what they were trying to teach us. Life is hard and cruel? Yeah, for sure, but did they really need to stretch that idea into a 90-minute nightmare specifically made for children? I mean, this film has so many scenes that feel a bit too rough even as an adult. Surreal, hellish images, darkness and dread, and animals getting hurt, crushed and killed all the time. I just have a couple of questions. Who thought this was okay to make? Why did our parents let us watch it?
The field, it's covered with blood.
Blood? Don't be silly.
The brave little toaster also looks quite cute from the outside, talking household appliances, musical numbers. How could this possibly be dark? And it is. Not necessarily if you just look at a still image, but once you start watching it, you slowly realize the story feels like an introduction to existential dread for kids. It delves into themes like abandonment, loneliness, and feeling worthless, which are pretty heavy subjects for a children's film. The junkyard sequence is especially haunting. These old, obsolete cars are singing while being crushed to death.
I took a man to a graveyard. I beg your pardon, it's quite hard enough just living with the stuff I have learned.
It's basically a musical number about being discarded, forgotten, and destroyed. I probably didn't fully understand the meaning behind it as a kid, but honestly, that was probably for the better. There was a great period in the 80s when fantasy films weren't always sure who they were made for, kids or adults, and then the filmmakers basically said, let's try this strange combination of family-friendly and hardcore and see what happens. Well, this happened. As a kid in The NeverEnding Story, I never quite grasped the overall theme of nothing eating up everything because humanity is losing its sense of fantasy and creativity. It's an amazing subject for a kids film, but I had to grow up to really understand the point of it. But as a kid, I loved the visuals, the atmosphere, the adventure, the characters, and the whole world. I actually saw this one in the cinema in the late 80s. So when I got to the scene of Artax sinking into the swamp of sadness, I had nowhere to run. Even if I closed my eyes, I could still hear the screams and the moans.
Come on! Turn around! You have to now!
It's such a slow scene. It feels like it takes forever for that poor horse to sink, and every extra second makes it harder to watch. Also the fact that Artax basically gives up, and that giving up is presented as something that can actually happen, was shocking to see as a kid. Even today, as an adult, I consider that scene one of the most gut-wrenching ever put on screen. Great film, but come on. The original Wizard of Oz film is controversial, but mostly for things that happen behind the scenes. Return to Oz, the unofficial sequel, takes that darkness and puts it on the screen and amps it up to a whole other level. The film itself feels more like a hallucination than a proper fairy tale, with some truly amazing visuals, creature designs, and sets. The scene where Princess Mombi casually swaps her head for a different one is haunting and unforgettable.
What do you think?
But that's just one of the many weird, abstract scenes and creatures we get. Everything is carefully balanced on the edge of cute, strange, and scary at the same time. It certainly feels like they went overboard a few times, but that's exactly what makes this version stand out. The Dark Crystal by Jim Henson is another unforgettable experience from the 80s. The film itself is a marvel of technique and invention, and it still looks amazing today. There are full-body creature suits, hand puppets, animatronics, radio-controlled facial mechanisms, and incredible sets all around. But what makes it feel so strange and otherworldly is the fact that there are no human characters at all, only fantastical creatures. Sure, we've seen dozens of animated films without human characters, but can you think of another live-action fantasy film when there isn't at least one human being on the screen? That familiar human presence usually helps us connect to the story or step into a strange world more easily, but here that anchor is completely missing. You have to enter this world on its own terms, and I think that's one of the reasons why the film still feels so uncompromising. Jim Henson originally wanted the creatures to speak a completely invented language as well, with the movie shown using subtitles, but I guess that was a tad too far for the producers. And I still remember the scene where that poor creature gets strapped into the chair and drained of its life essence. It's so disturbing.
You're very lucky, slave. Only the Emperor can drink your essence.
Labyrinth from 1986 is Jim Henson again, but this time we have at least a few human characters to help ease us into this strange, dream-logic world. The story follows Sarah, a teenager played by Jennifer Connelly, who has to find her little brother after he's taken by the Goblin King, played by none other than David Bowie.
Go back to your room. Play with your toys and your costumes. Forget about the baby.
Again, there are a huge number of memorable characters, scenes and sets, starting with the amazing looking Labyrinth itself. But then we get scenes like the huge drill sequence or the helping hand scene where Sarah falls into the darkness and hundreds of hands form faces, grab her, speak to her and decide where she goes.
Well then, come on, which way?
Which way?
Up or down?
It's incredibly creative, but as a kid, it definitely gave me the creeps. Time Bandits feels like a chaotic children's adventure, but it has Terry Gilliam's bleak, absurd worldview all over it. Adults are selfish, history is dangerous, God and evil are treated almost like bureaucratic forces.
If I were creating a world, I wouldn't mess about with butterflies and daffodils. I would have started with lasers. 8 o'clock, day one.
And we get those surreal Fish Islands images all the time. Faces pushed right into the camera with strange expressions on them. Very Gilliam. What really sticks out to me, however, is the ending. Kevin, our child hero, finally gets home again, and then his parents just explode and vanish into nothing. And all the other adults around him barely seem to notice that anything happened at all. It's very funny in a Terry Gilliam way, but as a kid, that felt very cold. Now I'm going to mention a few episodic nightmares, because instead of giving us one quick 90-minute dose of dread and sadness, these shows could stretch that feeling out over for weeks or even months. And once we were hooked, we couldn't just not watch the next episode when it came out, even though we knew very well that it wasn't going to be a fun ride. Under the Mountain was made in New Zealand and distributed to quite a few countries, dubbed into many languages, and that's how I found it on TV in the very early 90s. It starts off exciting enough. A mysterious Mr. Jones saves 2 small kids.
My name is Mr. Jones. One day, you'll remember me.
Who happen to be chosen to save the planet from strange, slimy creatures living under the mountain. They grow a bit older, spend the summer near that same mountain, and that's when all hell breaks loose. The main score is already haunting. But as we slowly get to know the neighbors, the Wilberforces, who are actually shape-shifting, Lovecraftian beings hunting the kids.
He's here somewhere. They both are.
The episodes turn darker and darker, and more than a few times venture straight into horror territory. There are quite a few scenes and images that stay with me, and even the sound they make is iconic. It immediately brings me back to all those haunting memories. Oh, and I just love the H.R. Geiger style sets of the underground base of the Slug People. What a cool looking corridor. And it's fully available here on YouTube if you want to check it out. The Mysterious Cities of Gold wasn't gory or graphic, it was more about the general mood of the show and the themes it explored. I think the idea was to create a show that could educate children and inspire a sense of wonder and exploration through history, mystery and intrigue. But a lot of other themes slipped in as well, like loneliness, loss of parents, child kidnapping and basically slavery. Yeah. So it had a lot of heavy themes, but what's more interesting to me is that all of their adventures, exploring mysteries and secrets from the past, were dangerous, scary and not necessarily fun. They felt more like missions or even chores, things they had to do while risking their lives and constantly putting themselves in harm's way. After every episode, there are a few minutes of live-action documentary-style material where we can learn more about the specific historical references from the story, but I would argue that kids watching this show might have developed a slightly different attitude toward history. Well, let's not bother with history too much, seems a bit dangerous. Are You Afraid of the Dark was basically Tales from the Crypt or the Twilight Zone for kids, with each episode starting around a campfire where scary stories were told. It was an anthology show, so they could go all out with different ideas, monsters and weird little pieces of lore. There is one episode where a computer virus turns into a nasty little goblin-like figure and pursues our young hero throughout the story.
So, I guess that leaves us with something strange.
The makeup and the performance are so over the top, but somehow scary at the same time, it burned itself into my mind. In The Tale of the Fire Ghost, we get to see a burnt ghost dude walking out of the smoke like a zombie and then burning away Freddy style. And what about this guy? How does he fit into a kids show? I mean, that dude would look great in a proper horror film as well. And maybe the most memorable one from this show was Zeebo the Clown. A kid steals his nose, and apparently that's a bad enough move to get haunted by a plastic clown figure. I think this show was a great introduction to horror and fantasy for kids. It was much less safe than something like Goosebumps, and it definitely had some traumatic moments. The Animals of Farthing Wood was an animated TV show about animals living in a forest. They all seem cute at first, but that's just the surface. Because in almost every single episode, animals get hurt, and very often they die. And the violence doesn't really feel cartoony. There is blood sometimes, a lot of suffering and moaning, a lot of running, hiding and panic. Pure nightmare stuff, all packaged inside this family-friendly looking talking animal cover. It is considered by many one of the most brutal kids show ever made, simply because of the sheer number of animal deaths. And let me just read you a few episode titles. Between Two Evils, Deadly Calm, Survival, Blood is Thicker Than Water. That sounds less like a children's cartoon and more like walking through the rental store looking for a B-action movie. There is an impaled mouse. What a fun image to see as a kid. I know the show probably wanted to do something meaningful, maybe teach us that death is part of life, I guess, but I don't know why it wasn't enough to just make a couple of episodes like that. But hey, we grew up watching this and we are okay, right? Right? And I already mentioned a couple of Jim Henson creations in this video, The Labyrinth and The Dark Crystal, but I wanted to add one more, Jim Henson's The Storyteller.
The best place by the fire was kept for the storyteller.
The main concept of the show was to visualize old European folktales that were not as well known in the West. The framing device had an old storyteller, played by John Hurt, sitting by a fire and telling each tale to the viewers and to his talking dog, who was a really fun character on his own right.
There are important things in this bag. And besides, I need those biscuits for my story.
Well, tell your story, then we can eat them.
And since Jim Henson was the creative mind behind it all, you can expect all the familiar elements: heavy makeup, practical effects, prosthetics and a lot of animatronic creatures. The stories themselves stay true to their origins, which means death, devils, trolls, betrayal, cruelty, curses, monsters and moral punishment. It didn't feel sanitized or toned down. There's a story about a soldier capturing the devil himself, a king trying to murder a child, and a king marrying his own daughter. Yeah. But for me, the most memorable one was Hans My Hedgehog, a sad story about a child born covered in quills, rejected by his father and mocked by other children. It was visually and emotionally disturbing, and once again, it's an image burned into my mind forever. It was just the perfect fairy tale gateway drug to horror for children.
Do you know what this is? A sack. Well, if this is a sack, then get in it.
So there you have it, a bunch of traumatic TV shows and films that shaped our childhood and gave us our first nightmares. And also introduced us to genre cinema, something which I'm going to be forever grateful for, even if they hit a bit hard at times. Let me know in the comments what kind of shows or films gave you the nightmares back in the day, or is there a specific one that you think should be absolutely on this list? I'm also a filmmaker and I made an atmospheric, pretty dark, slow-burn horror film on a shoestring budget. It's titled Dreamland Awaits. It's out right now. If you want to help the channel spread the word about my film, link in the description. And if you enjoyed this video, stick around, there's a lot more coming. Thanks for watching.